VAMP, Chapter 14. Aden and I went out to dinner that evening in an effort to snap me out of the funk. He had made reservations at the fancy restaurant in the hotel the night before, knowing it would be a long day and we wouldn't want to travel too far, but that he would need to eat and knew I liked to. We got super dressed up with the help of the boutique downstairs. I brushed the curls out of my hair to give them a smooth 50s look, then pinned my hair to one side and hairsprayed the waves in place. The dress I'd chosen was a form-fitted black nylon dress that had a semi-deep V-neck and was covered with a black nylon, which showed off just enough skin and cleavage to make it classy. And I had splurged on some black satin Manolo Blahnik Nadira heels and a black Chanel Classic caviar clutch to finish off the look. I was just putting on my earrings when Aden walked around the corner from the bathroom. The man cleaned up nicely. He was freshly shaven, hair washed and pulled back low, and he was throwing his dark gray suit coat over his black button-up that was paired with matching dark gray pants and black Gucci Oxfords. Then I caught a whiff. He'd put on some aftershave or a cologne of some kind, and the combination of that with his already intoxicating scent made my mouth water like a fat kid thinking about pumpkin pie. I swallowed, resisting the urge to skip dinner altogether. He stopped once he'd gotten his coat on and looked at me while he buttoned the bottom too. "You look amazing," he said, moving his hands to his cuffs and pinning the cufflinks. His heart was beating a little fast. I finally finished clipping my earrings. "As do you." I threw a few things into my clutch and grabbed his hand, and we exited the hotel room. "You sure you want to go out into public right now?" he asked before we walked too far from the door. "I'm sure. Thanks for being concerned, but I'm okay. I've been looking forward to the amazing dinner ahead too. It was really sweet of you to put this together." "Least I can do," he said. We made our way through the lobby and shops to the restaurant at the back of the hotel. It was a quiet atmosphere, with light piano music playing in the background. The lighting was dimmed, and there were candles on each table enhancing the warmth. They led us to a table in the far corner that was next to floor-to-ceiling window looking out over the water. The sun was setting, and the sky was shades of pinks, purples, reds, and blues. It was so pretty that Aden and I both took out our phones to take pictures of the view. The hostess sat us down and left us with some drink menus to get started. Even though I couldn't get drunk, I still liked tasting wines, so Aden and I ordered a couple wine samples from the waitress when she arrived. We settled on the one we liked and got a bottle to share. Dinner was relaxing and fun. Our entire conversation had to do with what we were eating, how it tasted, and sharing with the other, so as Aden put it, we can taste a wider range of the menu this way. And he wasn't wrong. It made the whole meal fun, and when you got a glass of wine or two in him, he turned incredibly funny. We finished up our meal and drinks and decided to take off our shoes and go for a little walk on the beach. We held hands as we walked on the sand. We weren't talking, just enjoying each other's company and listening to the waves crash on the shore in consistent repetition. "Have you ever changed anyone into a vampire?" Aden asked. I stopped for a second, surprised at how out of the blue his question was. I looked at the horizon while thinking back in time. "Only once," I said, looking back at Aden. He looked strikingly handsome. I didn't really want to change him, but his family was begging me. I had just moved to France and was living with a man named Henry and his two boys, Francis and Jacques. They knew what I was because Francis had decided to follow me one night. He saw me feeding off a man in the back alley, and instead of running scared, he just stood there and watched with this look of fascination on his face. I let go of my dinner and asked Francis to come talk to me about what he'd seen, and he completely trusted me. He said that I was too nice and too pretty to kill anything. I laughed and started walking along the beach again. Anyway, he was fine with me. It was so odd. Totally not what I was expecting, but it worked out. He promised to keep my secret safe and wanted nothing in return. Children can be so open-minded when given the chance. They have an innocence about them where they accept everything and love everyone. I made my keep by making their meals and keeping the house clean. Well, one day Henry fell terribly ill. The doctor said there was nothing they could do, and that his chance of surviving was very minimal. His son sat there by his bedside just sobbing. Then Francis looked at me and said, "You can save him. You can turn him into you, right?" I just looked down at him, at those pleading eyes, and told him I was sorry, but I couldn't do that. I couldn't turn his father into what I am because he may hurt them. But he continued to beg me. He wrapped his little arms around my waist and buried his face in my stomach and cried. It was like everything started moving so fast after that. I could hear Henry's heart and lungs shutting down. Then something in me snapped, and I grabbed Francis by the shoulders and said, "Do you understand that he won't be the same man if I do this? Not the same mentally or physically. I can't take this back. It's a done deal. There's no do-over. Are you sure this is what he would want?" And Francis just looked at me and said, "Save my dad. He's all we've got." And that's all it took. A little 12-year-old boy begging me to save his father's life, and I caved. Probably because I still felt so guilty for what I'd done to my own father. As I walked over to Henry, I became more and more frightened. All I could think about was when I was turned and how it hurt, and how the pain surged through every inch of my skin, and how I noticed the difference in myself the second I woke up. I told Francis and Jack to go over to the neighbor's house and stay the night. I didn't want them watching this or being here when Henry would wake. They left, and I crawled on top of Henry, pinning his arms down to the bed. I bit him on his right ribs. He started shaking just like I had. His eyes fluttered open, and I took him out to a back alley where I killed a thief, and then let Henry suck him dry. After he fed, I brought him back to his house and explained everything. I stayed with him for an extra year or so I could help him and teach him everything I knew, and then I went on my way. He lived to see both his sons grow old, have families, and die, and once they were gone, he shoved a wooden stake through his own heart. Aden was silent for a few minutes, just looking at his feet as he walked in the sand. Then he grabbed my hand again and smiled. "Was he mad at you for turning him?" "No, he was thankful that he got another chance to see his boys grow and have their own families. That made it a little easier, but I never wanted to turn anyone again." He nodded and looked out at the water. "Please, don't take this the wrong way, but I don't ever want to become a vampire. I believe we're put on this earth for a certain amount of time, and when our time is up, it's up. I don't take it personally. It's not the decision I would have chosen, but I wasn't given the choice. And because of that, I would never turn you or anyone against their will." We suddenly realized how far we'd walked and turned around to head back towards the hotel. "How old is the oldest vampire?" he asked after a few seconds of silence. "The oldest one in our clan is Vladimir. He's over 600, but the higher-ups are in their early thousands. Although I did meet this lady vampire, Sita, one time. She said she was around 5,000 years old. If that's true, that would make her the oldest, and probably one of the originals. I can't even imagine that much time on Earth. Think of everything you would know or see," Aden said, shaking his head. "It's unimaginable." "Not for me," I said, looking up at him. Aden shrugged and said, "Yeah, I suppose it's a reality for you." We walked in silence for a few more minutes until we came up to our hotel. We walked over to a fire pit and sat down next to it. I stuck my hands out in front of me to feel the warmth of the fire, and then Aden scooted closer and wrapped his arm around me. "I do want to thank you, though," he said. I looked at him quizzically, raised one eyebrow, and asked, "For what?" He looked down at the fire, and I watched the reflection of the flames in his eyes when he said, "You opened my eyes to a whole new world. Something that I believed to be imaginary, but it's real, and it's kind of extraordinary." He paused and shook his head. "It just gives me a whole new look on life, I guess. I used to be very closed off and pessimistic, but ever since I met you, stuff has changed." He looked back into my eyes. I held his glance for a second, and then leaned in and gave him a kiss. "Should we go upstairs?" I said quietly into his ear. He looked me in the eye with a childlike grin and nodded ever so slightly. We silently made our way back through the crowds and hallways to the elevator, which we were destined to share with 3 chatty grandmas who were visiting their grandkids and wanted to gush over Aden's handsome good looks. One little grandma even elbowed me and leaned in close. "Little lady, you better climb that tree before I do." She made me laugh out loud and then winked over at Aden as the door opened for our floor. He hadn't heard her, so the confused look on his face made the moment even better as she waved us good night with a cheeky grin. I turned my head to catch her eye before the door closed and slightly nodded and winked back at her while thinking, "You got it, Grandma." And I could hear the women laughing and reminiscing about being young as the elevator lifted to their floor. Aden opened the door to the room and let me walk in ahead of him. I set my clutch on the countertop and kicked my heels off under the bench. I heard Aden remove the Do Not Disturb sign and move it to the front of the door before it closed and latched. I turned around to see him flipping the deadbolt and locked eyes with him. We didn't need any words. My hands moved to his coat, and I pulled it off his shoulders and let it fall to the floor. His hands moved up to my back and pulled the zipper down the back of my dress. Slowly, each piece of clothing made a trail from the door to the bed. It had been a day of death and saying goodbye to the last human who'd known the real me. But our evening was far from dead. If anything, Aden and I ended up feeling more alive than ever.